The most important thing you can give to someone who's grieving, who's going through a difficult time, is the gift of your presence and the gift of space for them to tell their stories. Our identity is narratively encoded. We are our stories, is another way of saying the same thing. We are our stories, and we need places to tell our stories, to process our stories, and to create our identity. So give that gift to people, especially in times of their grieving. Just sit with them and listen.
Hello, and welcome to More Than Sunday, a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive into the stories, themes, and questions of our faith. My name is Eric Chikowski. I'm one of the worship directors here at First United Methodist Church Richardson, and with me every week is one of our associate pastors, Josh Fitzpatrick. Josh, good to have you today.
It's good to be here, Eric. Hey, so today on the episode, we want to dive right into a topic that as we approach the holiday season, coming up on Thanksgiving in a couple weeks, and then followed by Christmas another month later, is something that weighs heavy on some of our hearts, and that is the fact that some of us go into this season all cheerful and joyful and looking forward to the holidays, and there are others of us who don't for one reason or another. And so we really want to talk about what it's like to be carrying the burden of grief as you go into the holiday season.
So grief is something that in our Western culture, specifically maybe in America, oftentimes we gloss over grief. We repress it, we move on too quickly. But what we know from research and from the way that we have found that grief and emotions manifest in our lives is that very often we don't see the value in allowing ourselves to process grief and take time to do so.
So we are currently in this sermon series called What Do You Say?, where we are talking about the importance of recognizing gratitude in your own lives and the way that it affects you. And it occurs to me that there's actually this tie between gratitude and grief. The very fact that we grieve means that we are missing some sort of presence of love in our lives, something that has gone on and has been lost, and we are grieving something that perhaps used to be whole and now isn't. And I think that has the potential to return us to a place of gratitude. Not to trivialize the process of grief itself, but I think that's one of the benefits of going through the process is recognizing that the fact that our heart is breaking means that there was something there that made our heart whole in the first place.
You know, there's a lot of different ways that that sentiment is articulated. I'm reminded specifically of a song that we used during our All Saints celebration at the beginning of the month. It's actually an Ed Sheeran song called Supermarket Flowers, which is a little bit of an interesting title. But it's got this beautiful sentiment and a line in it that sings, "A heart that's broke is a heart that's been loved." And then it moves into the chorus and sings, "So I'll sing hallelujah." And it goes on to celebrate the life of this person that's been lost. In the midst of the grief, there is still gratitude and celebration in that. And so as we continue this conversation around the topic of grief, we're looking forward to welcoming a guest who has been on this podcast before, but deals specifically in our pastoral care ministries, walks with people through their own grief. We are excited to welcome Dr. Scot Bontrager.
Today we are pleased to have on the More Than Sunday podcast an associate pastor here at First United Methodist Church Richardson. He's been on the show previously, but not with the same title because he has since finished his PhD. And so I'm going to say we are pleased to have the Reverend Dr. Scot Bontrager, PhD. Thank you for being with us today.
Crowd noise.
That's right.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Hey, so Scott, I've only worked with you for just over a year now, but it has quickly become obvious to me how much you care about people. How did you develop such a passion for pastoral care and for counseling?
The bishop told me to.
That's the right answer.
It was a mandate.
It was a mandate. I am a theologian.
Okay.
I am not just a theologian. I'm a systematic theologian working in the analytic mode.
Okay.
I do analytic theology, right? And everyone knows, it's an absolute truism, that theologians don't do pastoral care. I took the absolute minimum number of pastoral care hours in my theology education.
Sure.
Because I did not want to do pastoral care. I'm a theologian. I was going to go off and do theology. And the bishop decided that I needed to round out my education and round out my pastoral care experience. Mm-hmm. And so he sent me here to do pastoral care. And turns out I enjoy it and I'm kind of good at it. So I don't know is the short answer. The bishop made me do it.
And I think that's a fair answer. So your knowledge is not from the books, it's from the streets.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I developed and read the books and read the literature. But yeah, no, I did not have classroom training in pastoral care. I've gone back and done that work as I encountered situations where I had to know what I was trying to do in the moment.
That's really neat that through working in care ministry that God sort of convicted you in that way and showed you that you have a gift in it and that you have a heart for it as well. So many of our listeners, as you know, Scott, are church members, but we have quite a few who are not. So would you mind telling us a little bit about the care team we have at First Methodist Richardson and what makes it unique?
Well, at First Methodist Richardson, we have what I consider to be one of the largest for our size, if not the largest for our size, dedicated pastoral care teams. And then we have 2 elders, a local pastor, and 2 full-time or almost full-time lay people who do primarily pastoral care. We have a very high-touch pastoral care model here, which is based around the way pastoral care was done in the 1980s. And that is, we visit people in the hospital by clergy 3 days a week, by laity 4 days a week, which is unheard of. We are very involved in how we do pastoral care. It's just high touch is the phrase we keep coming back to. And it's unheard of in our conference. It's unheard of in our denomination. And it's really unheard of just in general in the way that pastoral care is being done, in North America in 2019.
Well, so in an era where we are trying to be forward-looking, in an era where we are trying to make our systems and our departments more efficient and these sorts of things, you referenced that we're still sort of operating in a 1980s model. Why do you think that is?
Well, efficiency isn't the goal. We have no desire to be efficient in our pastoral care. We have a desire to be effective. And there are 2 different categories. The marketplace, the capitalist marketplace, tells us that efficiency is supreme. And I don't think that in matters of faith and life and eternal life that efficiency is all that important. I walk into some of the most horrific situations in people's life. I describe myself as the pastor you least want to meet because if I show up, it's bad. Someone's died, someone's very sick, someone's about to have a major surgery, and that moment is a holy moment. And there's no way to be efficient in that moment. So this late capitalism push for efficiency just is radically misplaced when doing pastoral care. Couldn't give a care about being efficient at it.
Which I think is what makes our care team so effective, if you're using that word. Is I know in speaking with you and the rest of the team and seeing your philosophy and the ways that you deal with people, there's a certain sense of urgency in getting there, but then patience when you arrive. And I love that.
Yeah, I will stay 45 minutes, an hour, because that's what the moment calls for. And I've had people say, don't ever stay longer than 10 minutes. And I just lose my mind at that. No, this is a holy moment. These are people in crisis. I let the person dictate, the situation dictate what they need rather than me telling them what they need. So it's careful listening, which should be the first thing of pastoral care is close your mouth, use your ears. And beyond that, be present. My gift to the person is my attention and my presence.
I love that philosophy. I think it's going to be very pertinent for the conversation today. We want to talk in particular about these things that happen around the holidays. Some of us, as the holidays are approaching, are cheerful and excited, and others of us, really have a hard time maybe around the holidays. Would you mind telling us why some people really struggle around this time of year?
We, as a culture, carry such a high expectation for Christmas in particular, but the holidays in general. We're told that these things should be perfect. And we all know that there's no such thing as perfect other than God. But we build these things up and set them up to have such an unreasonable expectation for what they ought to be that, of course, we're never going to make that mark. So with that level of desire for perfection, we're always going to disappoint ourselves. And when you couple that with the reality of grief, and at any given moment, a good number of people in our sphere, people around us, are going to be grieving, of course they can't be perfect.
So when you talk to church members and other people around the holiday season who are coming to you for advice or for counseling, what are some of the things that people are struggling with this time of year?
It's that expectation of I should be happy.
Okay.
I should be joy-filled, and I'm not. And my shtick is don't should all over yourself. Be true and honest to who you are. If you're not happy, don't pretend to be happy.
Right.
Don't force yourself to be sad because you think you ought to be sad in the moment. Give yourself permission to be happy on Christmas if that's what's coming to you. But be true and honest about what it is that you feel. And don't let the shoulds and the oughts win out over the is. That's a way to insanity.
When you talk about perfection and the fact that none of us are perfect except for God, one of the reasons we are doing a sermon series over Advent this year called Unfiltered is to tackle that very subject, right? That we have this tendency, whether it's because of the rise of social media and some of these other platforms, we have this tendency to filter either in pictures or in stories or in sort of what we display to the public, this perfected image of what our family looks like and our perfect Christmas card and our this, that, and the other thing. And so as a church, we're feeling that as a worship design team, and so really wanted to lean into that subject. So Scott, you've mentioned what you would say personally to people that are struggling. Oftentimes, we come to pastors and counselors to say, I have friends that are struggling, and I would love some advice on what to say, what not to say, how to be around them, how to help. What advice would you give to somebody who's in that scenario?
So the first thing I would say is don't worry about what to say. Don't say anything. Just listen. The most important thing you can give to someone who's grieving, who's going through a difficult time, is the gift of your presence and the gift of space for them to tell their stories. Our identity is narratively encoded. We are our stories is another way of saying the same thing. We are our stories, and we need places to tell our stories, to process our stories, and to create our identity. So give that gift to people, especially in times of their grieving. Just sit with them and listen. The cliches are always wrong. God doesn't need another angel. Heaven didn't need another star. Just give the gift of your presence in your ears.
Okay, so let's say that I'm that person who is struggling this season. Maybe I've lost somebody special to me just within the past year, or maybe there's just something, a financial hardship or something that's really dragging me down this season. Are there some resources that maybe I'm not quite ready to go see a pastor yet, or even maybe admit it to my friends that I'm struggling this year? Is there something that I personally can seek after for some help?
I'm a firm believer that we wouldn't need pastors and we wouldn't need therapists if we all just had better friends. But none of us know how to be that really good friend. And so that's why we have therapists and we have pastors. You need a place to just process and tell your story. If you're unwilling to go find a pastor to talk to or find a therapist, journal. It's the number one spiritual discipline on many people's list because it's so effective. You need to get it out of your head and into something else, whether that's another person's ears or a sheet of paper or a word processor document. Write out what it is that your mind is dwelling on. And once you get it out of your head, then that creates the space for it to start processing and go away.
That's great. I love it. What about some other resources that our church provides around this time of year?
So twice a year, I do Help for Hurting Hearts, which is a 6-week class on working through grief.
Okay.
And that's my first suggestion. For divorce, April does her divorce recovery program, which is excellent. The Service of Hope happens every year. It is probably, other than Christmas Eve and Easter Sunday, the only time you will see every pastor in the church together in the chancel. It's a very small, intimate service that we do that just creates space for you to be where you are for a Christmas worship service that's not designed to be joyful, joyful, we adore thee, and jingle bells and all the happy stuff, but really in the depths of the darkness of the season.
So knowing that so many Christmas Eve services are joyful, joyful, and jingle bells, as you've described, the Service of Hope is hopefully a great option for people who are grieving to be able to celebrate, but also be able to live into their grief and claim that.
It's permission. It's permission for you to be your authentic self in worship at Christmas time when your authentic self isn't Merry Christmas.
Right. Right. So what are some other things, just in general, this church or other churches, what are some other things that churches can do a better job of in being sensitive to people who aren't so cheery around the holidays, who may be struggling with grief?
So on Sunday mornings during Advent, it's really hard. Everybody wants to say Merry Christmas. Everybody wants to say Happy Holidays. And I fall into that rut. And when I'm shaking hands at the door and say, Merry Christmas to everyone, just being conscious of the burdens that people carry with them. And I don't always know those burdens. I usually don't know those burdens. But taking that extra second to look in someone's eyes and say, Merry Christmas, how are you? How's your soul? Can be enough. Just being seen and acknowledged is usually what people want.
If someone wants to get in touch with our care team here at the church, what's the best way to do that?
So either call the church and ask for the Caring Ministries, or email caring@fumcr.com, or we've got a form on the website that allows people to submit prayer requests or request a contact from a pastor. We try to make it as easy as possible. I don't think we've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook yet, but...
Not specifically for the care team.
Not specifically for the care team.
But fumcr.com would be a great place to start.
Now, we've had the pleasure in Season 3 of being able to welcome back some guests that we've had before, as Josh mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, that Scott has been on before. Scott, you know that we ask a question of everyone at the end of every episode, and we've been tweaking that just a little bit for repeat guests. So I'll ask you this question. What is one thing that you want folks that are grieving to know during the holiday season?
First and foremost, that you're not insane. It's okay to be sad at Christmas time. What you're going through is normal. You're not alone, that other people are going through this with you. There are resources available to you to help process this, and that the most important thing is for you to bring your authentic self to God. Be who you are in this moment.
Scott, I know this church and many, many people in this church are blessed by your ministry and are thankful for the fact that the bishop told you you had to do pastoral care and what that turned into. So we appreciate you here. We appreciate the conversation and guidance around this topic, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
It's so good for us to know that the cliches that are so easy to fall into that we think help people through their grief maybe are not the things that help people the most. Our responsibility is to honor grief, to, as Scott reminded us, listen more than we speak, give people the gift of our presence, let them know that we're here, that we care about them, that they're not walking through this grief alone, and maybe even that we honor the process of grieving, and as a church, remind them that there is opportunity for new life, for resurrection, and for new hope through Jesus.
Jonathan Trotter recently published an article through the Gottman Institute on their website called Outlawed Grief, where he talks about this very thing. And I want to read just a short couple paragraphs from that. It says this: people outlaw grief through pithy and useless sayings. He's in a better place, or it will all work out in the end, or at least it wasn't any worse. Basically, folks communicate to the griever that they should not be sad, that their grief is not right or welcome. Sometimes we outlaw our own grief, failing to give value to our feelings, seeing the tears as intruders that must be defended against. But grief is not on a timetable and doesn't always run on schedule. Sometimes it even leaves the station only to double back and park again and stay. If you're feeling this grief this holiday season, if you're struggling to be in a place of joy, we want to personally invite you to our service of hope. It'll take place in our sanctuary here at First Methodist Richardson on December 8th at 5:30 p.m. We want you to know that you are not alone, that we are here, and you are loved.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of More Than Sunday. If you like the podcast, please feel free to share it, go online and leave a comment, or give us a rating so that others might hear about us. We've got a new episode coming out every Wednesday, so make sure you also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our next episode. If you want to find out more about First United Methodist Church Richardson, you can find us online at fumcr.com, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Special thanks to Dr. Scot Bontrager for joining us this week, and make sure you tune in next Wednesday when we air our first podcast recorded with a live audience with our guest, Missy Buchanan. Have a great week.